I used to measure my life in small things, not in years, not in money, not even in milestones the way other people do, but in moments. The way my grandson used to run toward me with his arms wide open, like I was the safest place in the world. The way he'd fall asleep on the couch, his head on my lap, trusting me without question. The way he used to say, "Grandma, don't go anywhere," as if the idea of me disappearing was unthinkable. Back then, I believed that kind of love was permanent. That it didn't fade, that it didn't change, that it didn't get replaced by something colder, quieter, more distant. I was wrong. But you don't realize you're wrong all at once. It doesn't hit you like a storm. It happens slowly, like a crack in glass that spreads so quietly you don't even hear it until the whole thing shatters. My days were simple. I woke up early, always before everyone else. Old habits don't leave you easily, even when you no longer need them. I'd make tea, sometimes coffee if I felt indulgent, and sit by the window where the morning light slipped in like something gentle and forgiving. Then I'd start preparing breakfast, not because anyone asked me to. No one ever said, "We need you to do this." But I did it anyway. Eggs the way my grandson liked them, soft, never overcooked. Toast cut into perfect squares because when he was younger, he insisted triangles tasted different. Little things. Details that stayed with me long after they stopped mattering to him. I told myself it was habit. But if I'm being honest, it was love. That's what love looks like when you've lived long enough. It becomes quiet, practical, invisible, and sometimes unappreciated. At first, I didn't notice the change, or maybe I did, but I chose not to name it. He stopped coming into the kitchen in the mornings. That was the first thing. It wasn't sudden, just less frequent. Then rare. Then gone entirely. I'd still make his breakfast, still set it out the same way, only to watch it sit there untouched. "They're in a hurry these days," my daughter would say, brushing it off. "School, friends, everything." I nodded, because that sounded reasonable, because I wanted it to be reasonable. But reason doesn't soften absence, and absence has a way of growing louder than presence. He started answering me differently too, shorter replies, one-word responses. A distracted tone, like speaking to me was something he had to get through, not something he wanted to do. Conversations that once stretched into laughter and stories became brief exchanges that ended before they began. "How was your day?" I ask. "Fine." "What did you learn?" "Nothing much." "You eat?" "Yeah." Each answer closed a door. Each silence made the house feel just a little bigger and me a little smaller inside it. Still, I told myself this was normal. Children grow. They pull away. They build their own lives, that's what I told myself. But there's a difference between growing away and being pushed aside. I didn't see that difference clearly until much later. There were signs, though, always signs. He stopped sitting near me. Even when we were in the same room, there was always a space between us, small at first, then noticeable, then impossible to ignore. He'd choose the far end of the couch. He'd keep his headphones in, even when I spoke. His eyes would flick toward me, then away again like I was something peripheral, something that didn't require full attention. I remember one evening in particular, I had made his favorite dish. Not because it was a special day, but because I missed the way he used to smile when he saw it. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would bring back something, even a small piece of what we had. He came home late, walked past the kitchen without looking, sat down, scrolling through his phone. "Dinner's ready," I said gently. "Not hungry." I paused. "You used to love this," I added, almost without thinking. He shrugged. "People change." Wasn't cruel, that's what made it worse. It was casual, dismissive. Like what we had wasn't something worth holding on to. I stood there for a moment, my hands still, my heart caught somewhere between understanding and something much heavier. Because yes, people change. But love isn't supposed to disappear like that, is it? I didn't argue. I didn't push. I simply nodded and turned back to the stove, pretending I had something else to do. Pretending that the emptiness I felt wasn't slowly taking shape inside me. That was the beginning. The quiet beginning of something I didn't yet have the courage to name. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And the distance kept growing, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. Like a tide pulling something away from shore, I started noticing how often I was alone, even when the house was full. Conversations would happen around me, not with me. Decisions would be made without asking for my opinion. Laughter would echo from rooms I wasn't invited into. It wasn't hostility, that would have been easier. It was indifference. And indifference is colder than rejection, because at least rejection acknowledges you exist. Indifference erases you. Still, I held on to routines, to habits, to the idea that maybe things would shift back, that maybe this was just a phase, something temporary. Because what's the alternative? To accept that the love you built your life around has faded. No, I wasn't ready for that, not yet. The day everything changed didn't feel important at first. It was ordinary, painfully ordinary. That's the strange thing about moments that break you. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs or dramatic music. They slip into your life quietly, dressed like any other day, until they say something that can never be unheard. It was late afternoon. I remember the light was softer than usual, the kind that makes everything look a little kinder than it really is. I was in the living room, folding laundry. His laundry mostly, I still did that. Not because anyone asked, but because I always had. He walked in, dropped his bag on the chair, and headed toward the kitchen. I said, smiling automatically. "How was your day?" "Fine." It was again that word, so small, so empty, I hesitated, then tried again. I was thinking. Maybe we could have dinner together tonight, just us, like we used to. Wasn't a demand, it was a hope. He stopped, not fully, just enough to turn halfway, his expression already carrying that faint impatience I had come to recognize. "I've got plans." "Oh," I said, quickly adjusting. "That's okay. Maybe tomorrow then," he sighed, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for me to feel it. "Why do you always do that?" he asked, my hands stilled. "What?" Keep asking, like you need to be involved in everything. The words weren't harsh, but they weren't kind either. I felt something shift inside me. I just thought, "You don't have to," he cut in. And then the moment, the one that divided everything into before and after. "You're not needed." Just like that. No anger, no raised voice, just a simple statement. As if he were telling me the time, as if it were a fact, as if it were obvious. I don't remember breathing, I don't remember moving. I only remember the silence that followed, heavy, endless, the kind of silence that fills every corner of a room and leaves no space to hide. "You're not needed." The words echoed in my mind, repeating themselves, reshaping everything they touched. Years of love, years of care, years of quiet sacrifices, reduced to nothing. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw not the boy who used to run into my arms, but someone else. Someone older, sharper, detached, someone who had already let me go. "I see," I said softly. That was all, no argument, no tears, just acceptance, or at least the appearance of it. He didn't seem to notice anything had changed. Why would he? To him, it was just a sentence, just a thought spoken out loud. To me, it was something else entirely. It was a door closing, a final one. He turned and walked away, already moving on, already thinking about whatever came next in his day. And I stood there, still holding the folded shirt in my hands, still standing in the same spot, but no longer the same person, because something inside me had shifted, not broken, not yet, but cracked. And through that crack, something new was beginning to form. I didn't cry. That's what surprised me the most. I thought I would. I thought the weight of those words would crush me instantly, that I would collapse under the realization of what they meant. But instead, there was quiet, a strange, steady quiet, like the calm after something irreversible has already happened. I finished folding the laundry, one piece at a time, carefully, deliberately, as if the act itself mattered more than anything else. Because in that moment, it did. It gave me something to hold on to, something to do. Something that didn't require me to think about what had just been said. But thoughts don't stay away forever. They come back, stronger, sharper, more honest. That night, I lay awake longer than I had in years, not restless, not anxious, just thinking. I thought about the past, about the years when I was needed, when my presence wasn't questioned, when my role wasn't optional. I thought about the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the mornings I woke up early to make sure everything was ready. The countless small moments that built a life of quiet devotion. And I asked myself something I had never dared to ask before. When did that stop mattering? When did love become unnecessary? The answer didn't come easily. Because the truth is, it didn't stop mattering all at once. It faded, gradually, piece by piece, until one day it was gone, or at least unrecognized, and then I thought about his words. "You're not needed." Not angry, not cruel, just certain. That's what stayed with me, the certainty. Because it meant he believed it. And if he believed it, then maybe others did too. Maybe they all had, for longer than I realized. That thought should have hurt. And it did. But beneath the hurt, there was something else, something quieter, stronger, a question. If I'm not needed, then what am I? I had spent so much of my life being needed that I had never considered the alternative. Need had defined me, given me purpose, direction, value. But if that was gone, then what remained? At first, the answer felt like nothing, an emptiness, a void where purpose used to be. But the longer I sat with it, the more that emptiness began to change, because emptiness isn't always an end. Sometimes it's space for something new, something different, something that doesn't depend on being needed. That night, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. I didn't make any decisions, not yet. I didn't plan anything, didn't act, didn't confront. I simply understood that the life I thought I had wasn't the life I was living anymore. Understood that the role I believed in no longer existed in the same way. Understood that love without recognition becomes invisible, and invisibility has a cost. By morning, the house looked the same. Nothing had changed. Breakfast was still expected. Laundry still needed folding. The routine continued as if nothing had happened. And maybe for them, nothing had. But for me, everything had. I moved through the day differently, not slower, not faster, just more aware of the spaces between us, aware of the way conversations flowed around me instead of through me, aware of how easily I could step back and no one would notice. It wasn't a realization that came with anger. It came with clarity. And clarity is quiet. That's when the thought returned, not as pain, but as possibility. If I'm not needed, then what else could I be? That question stayed with me, followed me through the day. Sat beside me in the silence. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't push it away, I let it stay. Because something told me that question was the beginning of something, not the end. And as the day faded into evening and the house filled again with voices that didn't call my name, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I had spent years holding everything together, but no one had noticed when I started letting go. And maybe that was the answer, not to hold tighter. Not to demand to be needed, but to ask a different question entirely. What happens when I stop giving everything away? That thought didn't frighten me. It didn't overwhelm me, it simply settled, like something that had always been there, waiting for me to finally see it. And in that quiet realization, something inside me changed, not broken, not lost, but awakening. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what they needed from me. I was thinking about what I needed from myself, and that was where everything truly began. The strange thing about clarity is that it doesn't rush you. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand immediate action. It simply sits with you, quietly rearranging everything you thought you understood until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. After that night, after those words, "You're not needed," I didn't suddenly become someone else. I still woke up early, still made tea, still moved through the house like I belonged there. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Not visible, not obvious, but permanent. I stopped asking. That was the first change. No more, "How was your day?" No more, "Do you want dinner?" No more reaching out only to be met with absence. I didn't withdraw out of spite. I withdrew because I finally understood something I had refused to accept before. You cannot offer yourself to people who have already decided they don't need you. And more importantly, you shouldn't have to. At first, no one noticed. That's the part that stayed with me. All the things I stopped doing, and nothing changed for them. Breakfast disappeared from the table. Laundry remained unfolded. The small, invisible acts that once filled their lives with ease simply faded. And still, nothing. No questions, no concern, just adjustment. That was when clarity became something else. Not just understanding, but confirmation. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I had already been removed from their world long before that sentence was spoken. The difference now was that I finally saw it. And once you see something clearly, you can't go back. But clarity doesn't just take things away. It gives you something too, perspective. And perspective changes everything. I started looking at my life differently. Not through the lens of what I had given, but through the lens of what still remained: the house, the savings, the land my husband and I had worked for piece by piece, year after year, the small investments, the accounts, the things I had always thought of as for them, for the future, for family, for the people I believed would carry what we built forward. And for the first time, I asked a question I had never allowed myself to ask before. What if it doesn't belong to them? Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of truth. Because ownership isn't just legal, it's emotional, it's intentional. And somewhere along the way, I had handed over the meaning of everything I owned without ever questioning whether it was deserved. That realization didn't hurt, it freed me. The next step came quietly, like everything else. I didn't announce it, didn't tell anyone where I was going. I simply got dressed one morning, took my bag, and left the house. No one asked, no one noticed. The world outside felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked slowly, taking in things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The way the sunlight touched the buildings, the sound of people moving through their own lives, the quiet realization that the world was much bigger than the small space I had confined myself to. For so long, my life had been centered around them, their needs, their schedules, their lives. And now, standing outside of that, I realized something almost unsettling. I still had a life too. I just hadn't been living it. The office was smaller than I expected, neat, organized, unremarkable. But to me, it felt like a doorway, a quiet threshold between who I had been and who I was becoming. The woman at the desk greeted me politely. "How can we help you?" I hesitated for only a moment, then I said it. "I'd like to review my estate." The words felt strange, heavy, important, like they carried more meaning than I fully understood yet. I was led into a room, introduced to a man who spoke calmly, professionally, without assumption. And for the first time in a long time, someone listened to me, not out of obligation, not out of habit, but because it was their role, because I had something that mattered, because I mattered. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. And for a moment, I didn't know how to answer, because what I was thinking wasn't simple. It wasn't just about money or property or documents. It was about everything those things represented: love, legacy, trust, and the quiet realization that all of it had been built on an assumption that no longer held true. "I thought I knew who I was leaving everything to," I said slowly. Now, I met his eyes. Now I'm not so sure they deserve it. Was no judgment in his expression, no surprise, just understanding. And that gave me permission to continue. We went through everything, every asset, every account, every piece of my life that had been reduced to numbers on paper. But this time, I didn't see numbers. I saw choices. I saw years of effort. I saw moments that had built something real. And for the first time, I realized that I had control over where all of it would go, not obligation, not expectation, control. That word settled into me, slowly, powerfully, because it had been so long since I felt it. "You can change anything," he said gently. "Nothing is set unless you decide it is." Is set. The simplicity of it struck me, because for years I had lived as if everything was set. As if my role, my purpose, my giving had already been decided, as if there were no other options, but there always had been, I just hadn't seen them. "What if I wanted to give it away?" I asked. He nodded. "To family." I paused. No, that single word felt heavier than anything I had said before, but also clearer. "Then to whom?" he asked. And that was when something unexpected happened. I didn't think about them, not my grandson, not my daughter. Not anyone who had slowly stepped away from me. Instead, I thought about moments, people, small kindnesses I had overlooked before, the neighbor who checked on me when no one else did, the community center that gave warmth to people who had nowhere else to go, the young woman at the market who always smiled, who always treated me like I still existed, the places where I had been seen, where I had been valued, where I had not been unnecessary. "I want it to matter," I said quietly. "Not just exist." That was the beginning, not of loss, but of intention. The process took time, more than I expected, because every decision carried weight. Every change forced me to confront something I had avoided for years. What does family really mean? Is it blood? Is it history? Or is it something else entirely? I didn't rush. I thought carefully, deliberately, because this wasn't about taking something away. It was about placing it somewhere it would be valued. That was the difference. And the more I worked through it, the lighter I felt, not because I was giving things away, but because I was reclaiming the meaning behind them. Meanwhile, life at home continued exactly as it always had. That was the strangest part. Nothing changed, at least not for them. They still moved through their days with the same assumptions, the same quiet certainty that everything would remain as it had always been. I heard conversations sometimes, not directed at me, but near enough. "We'll probably renovate the house someday. I've been thinking about what to do with the land. Things will be easier later." Later, that word, so casual, so cert, as if later belonged to them, as if it had already been decided. I didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't explain. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to. Their assumptions were no longer my responsibility, their expectations no longer my burden. And in that quiet separation, something powerful grew: freedom, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, real. I continued my visits, signed documents, reviewed details, adjusted plans, each step small but irreversible, each choice a quiet declaration, not of anger, but of self-worth. There were moments of doubt, of course there were. I'm not made of stone. I thought about him, my grandson, the boy he used to be, the one who needed me, the one who loved me without hesitation. And for a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh, too final, too distant. But then I remembered his words, not the sound of them, but the certainty behind them. "You're not needed." I realized something important. I wasn't taking anything away from him. I was simply accepting what he had already decided. That truth steadied me, grounded me, reminded me that this wasn't revenge, it was alignment. The final step came quietly like everything else. A signature, a document, a moment that on the surface looked simple, but carried the weight of an entire lifetime. "Are you sure?" the lawyer asked gently. I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Just like that, it was done. Everything I had built, everything I had once assumed would follow a certain path had been redirected, not erased, not lost, but given with purpose. The reveal didn't happen immediately. Life continued, days passed, nothing changed on the surface. Until the moment it had to, the gathering was ordinary. That's what made it so effective. A simple meeting, a conversation, nothing that suggested what was about to unfold. They sat comfortably, confidently. As people do when they believe the future is already theirs, I watched them, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And for the first time, I saw them not as my world, but as part of it. Just a part, no longer the center. The documents were presented, explained, read aloud with calm, precise words that carried more weight than any emotion ever could. At first, there was confusion, then silence, and then understanding. "You mean none of this?" someone started. The lawyer nodded. "It has all been reassigned." The room shifted, not physically, but emotionally. Certainty collapsed, expectation dissolved, and in its place, shock. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because the truth was already doing everything that words never could. My grandson looked at me, really looked, for the first time in a long time. And in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, not indifference, not dismissal, but realization and maybe regret. "You gave it away?" he asked. I met his gaze, calm, steady. Question hung in the air, heavy, loaded. And for a moment, I considered everything I could say, everything I could explain. But in the end, I chose simplicity. Because it deserved to be valued. The words weren't sharp, they weren't cruel, but they were honest, and honesty has a way of cutting deeper than anger ever could. No one argued, no one shouted, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to change. It was already done. The silence that followed was different from the one before it had been filled with absence. Now it was filled with consequence, and I sat there, not as someone who had lost everything, but as someone who had finally reclaimed something far more important, myself. In the days that followed, things changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but undeniably. They spoke to me differently, looked at me differently, as if trying to understand something they had overlooked, as if trying to reconnect something they had let slip away. But some things don't return the same way, not because they can't, but because they shouldn't. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I simply wasn't the same, and that difference mattered because for the first time in years I wasn't waiting to be needed. I wasn't measuring my worth by what I gave. I wasn't holding on to something that no longer existed. I was free. And freedom is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists, like a breath you didn't realize you were holding, finally released. Sometimes I still think about that moment, those words. "You're not needed." I realize now, they were never the truth. They were just the beginning. The beginning of seeing clearly, of letting go, of choosing something different, because being needed is not the same as being valued. And when you finally understand that, you stop giving everything away and start giving it meaning. That was what I took back, not the money, not the property, but the purpose behind it. And in doing so, I didn't lose anything. I gained everything that had been waiting for me all along: dignity, clarity, peace, and the quiet, undeniable truth that I had been needed all along. Just not in the way they ever understood. And maybe that was never my loss to carry, only my truth to discover.